Hi, I'm Affy, and for my presentation, I will be talking about ideas of Black dance and looking at the Black experience in terms of multiplicity, aesthetic, and narrative. So in our class, we talked a lot about how the Africanist aesthetic is ultimately tied to what we now know as American modern dance, and how you can't view those things as separate because, as Toni Morrison once said, the Africanist presence is like the ghost in the machine, or the unspoken. So basically, in creating dance and other forms of art in America, we draw from the Africanist legacy all the time and perhaps aren't aware of that. So to define Black dance, I'm going to talk about two guiding principles of aesthetic and narrative. In an essay by Brenda Dixon-Gottschalk again, called Whoa, Whiteness and Dance, she basically compares and contrasts the two aesthetics of European dancing and African or world dancing. And I'd like to show them to you really quickly. So if I could have a couple volunteers, that would be awesome. Thank you. Thanks, guys. So in terms of European dancing, you'll often find people dancing in couples, so kind of like you guys could do like a closed ballroom kind of embrace, or that too. Yeah, they don't need to. But thank you. Yeah, that would be another example of the form there. Another thing would be vertical torso alignment. So the torso on its own functions as a unit, and you can't articulate it separately. Another aspect of European dancing are pointed and lifted feet, providing an airborne quality. Yeah, those are some very nice pointed feet over there. And the last aspect would be lyrical or rounded arms that create continuous lines. Yeah. Wonderful, thank you. And in terms of African world dancing, you'll see things that are basically the opposite of this. So you'll often have performers dancing in lines or in circular formations. This is great, this is totally fine, thank you. Or even individually. And the feet will be often barefoot and flexed, which provides an earthy quality to the dance. And you'll have body parts moving independently, so parts of the torso can be articulated. Different limbs can be moving at different speeds. This is known as polyrhythm or polycentrism, and that creates a democracy of body parts. And the last thing, in contrast to the lyrical or rounded arms, you'll find more angular arms in African dance. Yeah, this is great. Thanks so much, guys. The last part of the Africanist aesthetic is what Brenda Dixon-Gottschalk also calls coolness. And coolness is basically embracing the conflict that arises in these differences. So when you have dissonance in the body in terms of polyrhythm or whatnot, the coolness will result from the juxtaposition of the detachment of the dancer and the intensity of the dancer's movement. And then going on to narrative, what's common in African American dance is for dance pieces to be a blend of the personal, the biographical, historical, and societal. And this is known as what Audre Lorde calls biomythography. And biomythography is the weaving together of myth, history, and biography in epic narrative form, which is a style of composition that represents all the ways in which people can perceive the world. And this also, biomythography in this type of work leads to a reframing and reinterpretation of African American cultural heritage. So in order to investigate more about Black dance. I'm going to use 3 really prolific Black choreographers to show what the lineage is and to think about notions of the Black experience and where their work fits in lines with these categories and deviates from it. So the first person I'm going to be talking about is Katherine Dunham. She was born on July 22nd in 1909 in Chicago, and she didn't actually start dancing until her late teens. And her first leading role was in a ballet called La Louviesse by Ruth Page. She received a bachelor's in philosophy and social anthropology in 1936 from the University of Chicago. She also, in that same year, won a Rosenwald Travel Fellowship for her combined interests in dance and anthropology. And this fellowship took her to Jamaica, Trinidad, Cuba, Haiti, and Martinique to do research. And her research linked the form and function of Caribbean dance and ritual back to its African roots. Her time in Haiti especially was deeply profound for her, and it began a lifelong involvement with both the people and the culture of Haiti. It also formed the core of what is known as Dunham technique, which basically lent to modern dance a lexicon of African and Caribbean styles of movement, which she integrated with ballet and modern dance. In 1937, she returned to Chicago and founded the Negro Dance Group, which later became the Katherine Dunham Dance Company, and she premiered her first piece in New York City. It was called Haitian Suite, and it was an excerpt of the longer piece L'Agaya, which was based on a Martinique folktale. Agaya is a Martinique fighting dance. It's one of her most well-known works, and it displays her what she's best known for, this blend of, I guess, typically American Broadway-style theatrics with authentic Caribbean material. And in 1939, she premiered, also in New York, premiered the piece Tropics and Le Jazz Hot, From Haiti to Harlem. This piece was originally supposed to just premiere for 1 weekend only, and because of its success, ran for 10 weekends and made her famous. In 1940, she began to perform worldwide and began appearing in films. The first film she appeared in was Cabin in the Sky, which was staged by George Balanchine, who's a famous American ballet choreographer. She also appeared in the 1943 film Stormy Weather, which was another film. During this time period, a lot of African American musicals came out, and she was involved in quite a few of them. In 1946, she premiered the revue Bal Negre. A lot of her work was performed in revues. Over her career, she created 5 of them, and they're basically these spectacles that were this combination of theater and dance. And Bal Negre is famous for its piece Shango, which is a piece that is about the Yoruba god, named for the Yoruba god of thunder, and is about the Haitian voodoo ritual. And I'm going to show a quick clip from that. So that is a piece that shows a pretty clear example of the aesthetic qualities we were talking about earlier. A lot of this piece is a dance that she learned directly during her time in Haiti and fused it with her own choreography to make Shango. This type of work continued, but unfortunately in the late 1950s she had to disband and reform her company due to financial issues and health issues. She had very severe issues with her knees. And by the 1960s, the constant disbanding and reforming didn't work and the company closed as we know it, but its legacy has continued through dancers like Alvin Ailey and Eartha Kitt. But during this time, she began a career abroad, mostly being a choreographer. She choreographed for the National Ballet in Senegal. She spent a lot of time educating and did a lot of cultural ambassador work in West Africa. And this essentially took her out of the limelight until the 1990s, when she was thrust back in at the age of 80, I think it was 84, 82, 84 actually, sorry about that. She began a 42-day fast from her home in St. Louis in support of Haitian boat refugees, and was basically told to stop by the president of Haiti and the Reverend Jesse Jackson, and only then did she actually stop. But when she was also ensured that people would take care of these refugees. In 2006, she passed away at the age of 96, and she's best known for, like I mentioned before, this blending of Afro-Caribbean dance and theatrical American dance, and these reviews. Over her career, she created over 90 pieces, and her repertory blended both this Afro-Caribbean type of work and early Black American dance. The next person I'm going to go on to talk about is Pearl Primus, who was known for her energy and physicality, which was characterized by leaps that were apparently up to 5 feet in the air. And she was known for being a very forceful and dramatic, powerful dancer, but also controlled and very graceful. She based a lot of her work on the work of other Black writers and on racial issues, and her subjects ranged from stonecutters in West Africa to like Dunham Caribbean religious practices and rural American life in the South. She was born on November 29, 1919 in Trinidad and Tobago, and later relocated to New York City. She graduated with a degree in biology from Hunter College and didn't actually start dancing until then because she wasn't able to find work as a scientist. So she began studying with the National Youth Administration's New Dance Group. In 1943, she made her professional debut in New York, performing her own work, African Ceremonial, and then began performing at the Cafe Society downtown, which was an integrated nightclub. In 1944, she gave her first solo recital, where she performed to the poetry and music of folk singer Josh White. And in 1945, she created one of her most famous works, Strange Fruit, which is based on a Lewis Allen poem about a lynching. And I'm going to show that really quickly as well.
Saccharine trees bear a strange fruit. Blood on the leaves and blood at the root. Black bodies swinging in the southern breeze. Strange fruit hanging from the poplar trees. Pastoral scene of the gallant South. The bulging eyes and the twisted mouth. Scent of magnolias, sweet and fresh. sudden smell of burning flesh. Here is a fruit for the crows to pluck, for the rains to gather, for the winds to suck, for the sun to rot, for the tree to drop. Here is a strange and bitter crop.
So, like I mentioned before, that's one of her most famous works. And anyway, going on, in 1949, like Catherine Dunham, she was awarded a travel grant from the Julius Rosenwald Foundation to study dance in Central and West Africa. In 1954, she married the dancer and choreographer Percival Board. Primus then became known more for her career as a dance educator. She received a master's in dance education from NYU in 1959 and a PhD in anthropology, also from NYU, in 1978. She became the first chair of the Five Colleges Dance Consortium in 1990 and was honored by President George H.W. Bush with the National Medal of Arts in 1991 before she passed away at the age of 74 in 1994. And the last choreographer I'm going to talk about is Bill T. Jones. He was born on February 15, 1952 in Bunnell, Florida. He went to the State University of New York at Binghamton and was a theater major on an athletic scholarship who started taking dance classes taught by Percival Board, who was Primus's husband. After finishing his time there, he met his longtime partner and collaborator Arnie Zane in 1971, and they founded the Bill T. Jones Arnie Zane Dance Company together in 1982. And this company allowed them to develop their choreography more, which was commonly evening-length works, and was very daring for its time. The two of them were known for being involved, and it was before then, it was very rare to see two men dance on stage together, especially two men of different races in a fairly intimate manner. Jones was known for mixing video, text, and autobiographical material with his work. He did this in the trilogy that began with Monkey Run Road in 1979, continued with the piece Blauvelt Mountain in 1980, and Valley Cottage in 1981. And both Jones and Zane became well known for being what we call postmodern or new wave choreographers. And they collaborated on very large-scale abstract pieces with a clothing designer named Willie Smith, and the late artist Keith Haring built some of their sets. In 1983, Jones was commissioned to choreograph a piece for the Alvin Ailey Dance Theater called Fever Swamp, and choreographed another piece for them called How to Walk Like an Elephant in 1985. In 1986, both Jones and Zane received a Bessie Award, which is a very prestigious award in the dance world. And in 1988, Arnie Zane passed away due to complications with AIDS. But Jones continued to choreograph and perform and expanded his lexicon even more to thinking about work that related to opera and musical theater. In 1990, he premiered a piece called Last Supper at Uncle Tom's Cabin, The Promised Land, and this piece structure is similar. It's similar to the idea of narrative that I talked about before, in the sense that it is about reframing and retelling a famous part of the African American cultural heritage, specifically Harriet Beecher Stowe's novel, Uncle Tom's Cabin. And I'm going to show a short little section from a documentary about the making of this piece. One of the sections is well known for is a section called the Eliza section, where there are 5 dancers playing the character of Eliza from Uncle Tom's Cabin, and they're all wearing a mask, and as each person does a solo that represents a different aspect of Eliza, going from the historical interpretation of Eliza to a gay man performing as Eliza, it changes, and these solos all take on parts of the dancer's personal narratives as well as parts of the story, and kind of question ideas that we have about race and gender and sexuality. Okay, give me a second. This works. So this is the second Eliza, and it's performed by a woman named Heidi, who is Jewish. That's going to talk about more too.
The people in the company are all very different, have very different life experiences, and Bill uses each of us individually for our experience, and that's how he gets a lot of his material. One of the things that he's worked with me on, for example, is because I'm a small Jewish woman, we've had a lot of dialogue. Him as a black man, and him also, his relationship with Arnie, who was a Jewish man. So we have a dialogue about that, and that's where my solo came from, which was about being a woman and my experience as a woman.
I believed. My father told me, turn the other cheek. My mother, she told me not to expect much. They both told me, have faith, be honest, be good. I believe them.
Though it appears that what the piece is getting at is the evils of sexism, what was really going on for me was partially the process of how it was made, which is she chose the words. She chose to say that this is something that she was taught as a child, and then this happened. She's been through something. It's not like a weak victim on that stage that night, but it's a choice that she is making to do this.
I knew something was wrong. He told me that I was crazy and that it was my problem.
I'm going to stop here. It's really interesting, and I wish we had time to watch the whole thing, but we unfortunately don't. In 1994, Bill T. Jones's company premiered a similar piece called, well, not similar, but similar in scope, a piece called Still Here. Still Here is known for, it was a 2-year project where Jones spent time working with terminally ill people to take their movements and their ideas of dance to create an evening-length work, and it's also one of his most famous works. In 2007, the company turned 25 years old and was given a very significant commission, and they were asked to create a work to honor the bicentennial of Abraham Lincoln's birth. And in response to this request, they created 3 pieces: 100 Migrations, which was a site-specific community performance project; Serenade the Proposition, which examined the nature of history; and Fondly Do We Hope, Fervently Do We Pray, which has been turned into another documentary. And in 2011, the company merged with the Dance Theater Workshop in New York City and formed New York Live Arts, which is a pretty prominent vehicle for artistic work in New York. So I'm going to close by kind of explaining more about my rationale to talk about these 3 dancers. To me, personally, Catherine Dunham was in my relationship to dance, she's very prolific. I am part Haitian and studied primarily ballet and modern dance before coming to Middlebury, and always heard about her through my mom and heard lots of stories about how she brought in traditions of my family's history and culture to the US, so she was very important to me. Her and Pearl Primus are dance anthropologists, or were dance anthropologists. I studied both dance and anthropology, and I like thinking about how to frame, as a dancer and as someone who makes dance, how to frame ideas about pulling in my heritage to the work I make, but also acknowledging that I wasn't trained in that necessarily in the African aesthetic, although the Africanist aesthetic is ingrained into my being as an American, which relates to Bill T. Jones in the sense that he is considered postmodern, but actively deconstructs this, honors this aesthetic, deconstructs it at the same time, and also asks the same questions as prominent white choreographers of the postmodern era. So the three of them basically are linked in this way that they start by bringing this aesthetic, well, Sharp Dunham brings the aesthetic to contemporary modern dance and to American culture. And Primus thinks about linking his history of culture and contemporary conversations about African American culture. And Jones basically expanded these conversations further and still does, and plays with ideas of liminality. And for me, I find that really fascinating in terms of how I will proceed to make work or think about dance. So yeah, that was what I'm researching and what I hope to learn more about in the future. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Vladimir Klemenovich, and I just need a minute to set up. Okay, so I'm a sophomore here at Middlebury, and I'm a film major. Haven't declared dance yet, but 99% chance I'm going to do a double major in those two fields. So I really am interested in how film as a medium and dance intertwine. So I chose to do, my presentation is called Embodied Technologies, but it's basically about the use of technology in dance through like the ages. So I will focus on, can everyone hear me? Yeah, awesome. So I will focus on like 5 points basically. I would like to give like a general overview of all the use of technology in dance performances, but that's a lot. So I'm going to focus on 5 really important points. So first being Louis Fuller, who many of you know as pioneer in modern dance. Then I will move on to Alvin Nicolai, who is again a famous American modern choreographer. Then I will talk about a little bit about motion tracking specialists at the open-ended group, and mention a contemporary Australian artist, Gideon Oberzenek, and last I will touch upon cinema and dance and talk a little bit about Wim Wenders. So my first point is Louis Fuller. So as I said, Louis Fuller was a pioneer in modern dance. She was a pioneer in modern dance. She was born in 1862 in Chicago, and she started performing in her teens. In the beginning, there was, as a pioneer, so there was no modern dance before her. She mostly did either stunts or worked as a singer or an actress in vaudevilles, which were very popular at the time. And somewhere around the 90s, she got really interested in movement, and she started exploring and seeing what are all the possibilities of movement and not just like the show and the spectacle. She made this piece that was called Serpentine Dance, which I will show you in a second, in 1891 too. And she performed it in the US and in France, Paris. It was much better received in Paris, so she decided to move there in 1892. And this is how the Serpentine Dance looked like. There's no sound, obviously, because it's ancient. And this was actually shot by the Lumiere brothers, who, like, also a lot of people know as some of the fathers of cinema, basically. So as we can see, she liked to work a lot with fabrics, specifically silk, but she also experimented with a lot of different fabrics and dyes and stuff like that. But what she's really famous for and accredited with is a lot of patents. She was very interested in sciences. She patented and invented a lot of colored gels for lighting, like the ones that we're using now, and as well as some luminescent chemical salts for garments and lighting as well. And because of this, a lot of historians are criticizing Loie Fuller because she was focusing more on, they're criticizing her as that she's contributed more in this sphere of performance production as opposed to movement. However, she was one of the first people who started thinking about movement on its own, apart from like the vaudeville shows. And we also need to acknowledge that she supported Isadora Duncan and Ruth St. Denis, which are two other really, really important pioneers in dance. In any way, her work changed modern dance as well as technological inventions to kind of emphasize her movement. And that brings us to the first concern of using technology in dance is, does using technology allow artists to not focus as much on movement and not to think about or devise movement as thoroughly as they would if they didn't use technology, which was a lot of criticism about Loie Fuller. And that's a concern that's present even today in modern dance, but we'll get back to that later. The next person I want to talk about is Alvin Nicolai. He was well known as the father of multimedia theater. He was very specific in the sense that he observed his dancers as one in many on his stage. So a dancer would not be the central figure of his piece, it would be part of the whole scenery and the environment that he would create. He called it decentralization of the dancer. So he had a lot of elaborate props. He had a lot of elaborate props, costumes, lighting, projections as well. And yes, he was also criticized, obviously, for for decentralizing the dancer, and especially because he would sometimes completely obscure the dancer's body, either like not showing a part, or in this famous case of his piece Numenon, in which he put his dancers in these like elastic plastic bags, in which they moved, and it was very controversial because he completely covered the dancer's body, which is kind of the principal motif of dance. But he argued that he was interested just in movement and not in the dancer's body. And
So can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Why do you think he did that?
I will talk about it.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, actually, I'm going to talk about it now. It all comes to, I feel, abstraction in dance. So abstraction is a trend that I feel is present in all art as we move from classical to contemporary, because artists try to move away from realistic representation of whatever the idea is to more abstract ones. The thing with dance, though, that it's nonverbal, and so dance is a pretty abstract form on its own, so there's only so many ways where you can go to like make it even more and more abstract. And I think obscuring the dancer's body and focusing just on movement is a product of that trend.
What about World War II? Sorry, that's not a question. I just wanted to throw that out there. But
Yeah, that's interesting. I haven't thought about that. But yeah.
sorry, just ignore me.
No, it's fine.
Sorry.
I mean, there was like a lot of trends, obviously. I'm not saying that he did it just because of that, but I'm saying that that's also one of ways in which we can observe how to use technology in dance, in that by using technology, we can do stuff like obscure the dancer's body. Like, in this case, you will see, this is one of his famous pieces. So this piece is very interesting because, as you can see, the lower half of the body is not present. It's because it's hidden behind a mirror, and he uses projections, which was pretty common in his pieces. So yeah, that was kind of my point to bringing the concept of using technology to achieve abstraction, and then. To further that, I am coming to the open-ended group. Open-ended group is a group of software developers, basically. It comprises of 3 digital artists, Mark Downey, Shelley Eshkar, and Paul Kaiser. I didn't include Mark Downey in this because he's kind of recent and not relevant for the rest of the open-ended group section. So Shelley Eshkar and Paul Kaiser worked a lot with modern choreographers and dancers to create very interesting work, like Merce Cunningham, Bill T. Jones, Trisha Brown, and Wayne McGregor. And they also included this element of obscurity and abstraction, and you'll kind of see and understand why.
B, C,
The movement of these figures was based on motion tracking of Bill T. Jones's movement. So they put him in a suit with sensors, and he would move around. They would record it on a computer and then use it to create pieces like this. As you can see, the dancer's body is completely absent. There's just lines that represent the body, but more importantly, the movement.
I had wings like Nora's dove. I'd fly away to the one I love. Oh yes, sail away, oh honey, sail. Where? I want you to look here in the trunk. I have some cornbread in there for you. Where? They went to bed. They pulled the real close.
I'm gonna let that play in the background because I want to move on. It raises a question of presence and absence. Because as I said, the dancer's body is completely omitted, and that brings a lot of questions like Ann Dill in her article Absent Presence. One of her arguments is that through taking out Bill T. Jones's body out of this figure of lines, we have achieved a more intimate connection with just his movement. What she means by that is that when we look at this drawing that is moving, because it's not a body, it doesn't have all the implications, political and social implications of a body, like gender, race, sexuality, ability, disability, physical appearance, body type. None of those things are present. One could argue that race, gender, sexuality, and all of those things influences the movement that comes through, but the more important thing is that you can infer that from the movement, but you can't see that on the figure itself, which is very interesting when we think about, especially Bill T. Jones, who often created pieces that were very oriented towards gender, race, and sexuality. And it just raises the interesting question of the value of the obscured body. And now I'm going to go to Gideon Oberzenek. I chose this artist for no particular reason. I saw some of his work, I really like it. And I think he does very interesting work with interactive media. So he's a contemporary artist from Australia, and he formed his company there, Chunky Move, in 1995. And he works a lot with a German software developer, Frieder Weiss, who developed Icon and Calypso, which are very interesting pieces of software, as you will see in a minute. In which he really combines the body and technology to create like very, very interactive and interesting pieces. That were a compilation of excerpts from several of pieces of the company. I mean, we also have visiting artists in residence here at Middlebury, Scotty Harwick. I don't know if anyone of you attended his recent performance, Shroud Dancing Digital Masculinity, in which you could see that he also used a lot of, not this, but different ways of achieving interactivity in the dance performance and interacting with technology. Projections are not the only way you can interact with technology in performance. Also, a lot of artists use motion tracking software to control music. So, like, they configure the software to their arm, and if they raise it or move it, the music changes or increases in volume. Like, it's very, very interesting. And that brings us back to the first question, whether choreographers can rely a lot on technology and like move away from movement. And a question that appears often in discussing technology in dance is, could the movement stand on its own? And I kind of agree with that question. Not in the sense that if you literally took away the technology from the piece, the movement, for example, in any of the pieces, if you like just took away all the technology, it wouldn't really make sense because the piece was created with movement and technology at the same time in mind. But I do believe that movement needs to be good in its own right. I mean, there's not such a thing as like a good dancer definition, but to just like artists think and create like movement quality. And the last thing I want to talk about is dance on film, which is something that I'm especially interested in. As you can see, I showed a bunch of videos. People who were talking before me and probably people who will talk after me will show you videos of dance performances because that is kind of the only and best way to document dance. So it became kind of an irreplaceable tool in any dancer's kit. However, there's a lot of questions of, obviously, if you take dance, which is this three-dimensional bodily experience in front of your eyes and put it on a flat screen, there's obviously going to be a lot that's going to kind of fall out and not going to be there anymore, but it's still the best we have of documenting dance, which is very important because, I don't know, when we talk about dance history, in particular, when we talk about really, really old stuff, we don't have any video to see it actually, but we can only rely on descriptions and so forth. So without film, could we, I don't know how much we could even talk about dance history, and we obviously would be, but we would have difficulties. Okay, so some of we already saw this video of the Lumiere brothers filming Louis Fuller. They also did some work with Isadora Duncan. And some of the other noticeable meshings of dance and film were The Jazz Singer in 1927, starring Alf Jalston, which was the first talkie. And then Dancing Lady in 1933, starring Fred Astaire and Joan Crawford. And this is when tap dancing starts in like the musical genre, begins in cinema, and so for the next like 40 years, there's a lot of musicals and dancing in cinema. And what I want to talk about is, I don't know how many of you have seen the movie Pinna. It's kind of a documentary created by Wim Wenders, who is an incredible German cinematographer, director. And he created it for Pinna Bausch. They actually started collaborating to create this project, however she died 2 days before the film was supposed to be shot, the shoot was supposed to start. There was a whole mess. But they did end up, he did end up doing it, and in both, I've seen in a lot of like film circles, it's considered to be one of the most successful attempts to capture dance, especially because he developed special 3D technology to capture it, which we will obviously won't be able to see, but with this 3D, he basically waited 20 years to make this movie because they met like 27 years ago, Pina and Wim Wenders, Pina Bausch and Wim Wenders. And he wanted to create a film about her choreographies and her life. And for those of you who don't know, Pina Bausch was a famous German choreographer. But he postponed it for 20 years because he didn't think technology was developed enough for him to actually even come close to capture dance and carry any of that energy over through cinema. But then he discovered this, then 3D technology came and he further developed it for the needs of this film. And that's it. However, I want to show you just literally 2 minutes of Pina, and I chose this sequence because I think it captures a lot of interesting qualities that we can get from mixing film and dance, like close-ups, site-specific work, and just like other elements of film. That being said and shown, I do believe that technology has a lot of potential to be used in performance art, but there are obviously certain things that will forever be able only to be expressed with the human body. That's it. Thank you. Unless someone has any questions. But no? Oh. Good.